the Caribbean islands are a fascinating place, and one wonders, let me see, I'm trying to get my mouse to work here as a pointer. I don't know why it's not working well. Oh, here.
No, that showed up. That showed up.
Can you see it?
Yes.
So here's a scene from about 10 million years ago. And basically the larger islands there are the Greater Antilles, that's Cuba, Hispaniola, Jamaica, those islands. They're chunks of Central America that have been on a plate that's heading towards Africa. And so their faunas and floras are most closely related to things that are in Mexico and Central America today. Now, the Lesser Antilles that are over in this area, can you see me, the pointer on the screen?
Yep.
Okay,
yes, yes.
Lesser Antilles, these are the tips of volcanoes. They were never connected to any land. This is where the plates are grinding together, just like Hawaii is a tip of a volcano sticking out of the ocean. And so these islands, everything there is unique. It had to get there by dispersal over the ocean, rafting, however it got there, it's there. So those are very special places. The Bahamas are kind of like South Florida. They're, a lot of that is ancient coral reefs that are exposed now because the oceans are lower. And everything that got there had to fly there or somehow get there on its own. So that's kind of the situation. So if you're looking at Cuba and what things are related to there, you would look to Central America or Mexico to find closest relatives. Okay, so if we look at a map, just a generalized map here of Cuba, Havana is up here. We say Havana, they say Habana, and that's in Western Cuba. Most tourists would go here to Havana, which is the old town. Old part of Havana has been renovated by Europeans in particular, and it's beautiful. It's like going to Key West here in Florida. Many restaurants and just interesting things there, old buildings, but a lot of tourists do the triangle. So they would go from Havana, maybe out here to the Vinales Valley, which we'll see some scenes of. It's a spectacular karst landscape. And then over to Cienfuegos here, which is a French colonial city, and then back. So in a week or so, you can do this triangle. And that's where most people go. But to me, the most interesting part is the eastern side of Cuba. And Eastern Cuba, it's only about 90 miles to Hispaniola. That's about the same to Florida. It's about 90 miles to Florida from this northern coast. And so Eastern Cuba not only has high mountains, but it's got things that are from Hispaniola that have flown over and gotten established. Whereas Western Cuba has things from Mexico that have gotten in here, and that's the only place you'll see them on the island is over in this side. Many other species are dispersed, throughout the islands, depending on the habitat and where it is. Here below are some of the different provinces, and this is quite different from before the revolution. Fidel Castro took over in, I think, January 1959. So this whole area was once called Oriente. And so if you're looking at museum specimens and you're looking, well, where's Oriente? You're not going to find that on a modern map. They've renamed it. In fact, Granma province, this is where Fidel first came to start the revolution from Mexico. And the ship was called, it was a sinking yacht called the Granma. And they corrupted that into Granma here, drop the D. And so that's a province now in Cuba. They also have islands. They have the Isle of Youth. It was renamed. It was formerly called the Isle of Pines. There's a lot of little islands along the north coast that look a lot like the Florida Keys. Big resorts here in Cayo Coco and some of these other places. Um, and coral reefs up here are spectacular. They call the ones up here by Cayo Coco the Garden of the King, and the ones in the south here, the Garden of the Queen. And people come from all over the world to dive those reefs and look at it. It is, I've never not done that myself, but that's something to do if you're into diving. Here's a different map of the mountains. So we see over here on the east side, the Sierra Maestra are the highest mountains. It's about 5,000 or 6,000 feet. A few years ago, we tried to climb Pico Turquino, which is the highest mountain there. We only got about 3/4 of the way up, and then didn't have enough supplies. We weren't quite prepared for that, and didn't make it all the way up. But all of these mountains are pretty inaccessible. There are very few roads, and who knows what's back in there. In fact, we found a new butterfly a few years ago, Callisto. We've named it Callisto sharkii. It's from this part of the mountains right here. But they also have some mountains in the middle part of the country here, the Escambray and Trinidad Mountains. And in the far western part of the country, there's some mountains here also from Havana all the way out to the west in Pinar del Rio area. Where my colleague is in Camagüey, there's some hills here, and you may take a birding trip that goes here. There's some famous places to see birds down in this part of the country. When you look at habitats that were there before Columbus got there, you see this lime green area that's mostly dry tropical forest, such as you might see in the Florida Keys. The soils there are really crazy. There's a lot of limestone that you might expect for a Caribbean island, but there's also metamorphic rocks and igneous rocks, and actually this landmass of Cuba is probably several land masses that have collided together in their travels eastward towards Africa and formed these things. One of the most interesting habitats is this mustard colored blobs here. These are serpentine soils, and I'll show you some serpentine soils. Serpentine's a very odd metamorphic rock. It's very low in common elements like calcium that plants need to grow, and very high in toxic metals like iron, nickel, chromium. And as a result, everything that's in those places are very special. The plants are all special, the animals are all special, and they're terrific places to explore. If you've been out to California, you'll see areas with serpentine soils. They're scrublands, again, with special plants and animals. And they also occur in the Appalachian Mountains from Georgia all the way up into New York. If you've heard of the Pine Barrens on Staten Island, that's a small serpentine barren that Art Shapiro, my major professor from UC Davis, did some work there and published some papers on that scrub. Well, let's just look at some scenes of Cuba a little bit. It's famous for the old cars, and that's so true. There's a lot of old Chevys and Fords, and they also have Chinese buses now. And they do a lot of trade with China because they can't really trade with anybody else with the embargo going on. All of these cars, some of them are in pretty bad shape, some of them are in pristine condition, and they take great pride, even the old clunkers, they take great pride in those. But they also have Russian cars, the Lada, and different models of those. When the Russians were there, they brought cars over, and I actually like the Lada. I would buy one, I think, if they were available. And of course, they still make Ladas. I saw one on the internet the other day that looks more like an SUV kind of thing. A lot of their labor is hand labor. They have tractors and stuff, but a lot of fields are plowed with oxen teams like this, and they take great pride in their oxen. You may see some of those shown to tourists. Beautiful oxen. Uh, uh, Weeding is done with hand crews with hose. They don't have money for herbicides or even fertilizer and stuff is hard to come by. And so they're terrific with organic gardening, for instance. Every city, every town there, the students from the schools have to work in their organic gardens to teach them about growing plants and where the food comes from, which I we would do well to have something like that here probably. They have their icons, Che, and of course um, uh, all the other revolutionary heroes. You'll see statues and billboard signs. They use billboards a lot to as propaganda. These are the 5 spies that were imprisoned in the United States from Miami, and Obama, as part of the opening up of Cuba and relations with Cuba, he sent these guys back home. And this was a billboard before they got back saying, bring them home. So there's a lot of propaganda like that, or signs like, like we have it great here in this city or whatever. But, I see just in Cuba, in Florida here, I see similar propaganda after being in Cuba and saying, wow, look at all that propaganda. And then I come home and here's Rick Scott saying, let's get to work. It's just like something out of Cuba. um, so we may not be that different from the Cubans in some ways. Let's look at a few places. Here's downtown Havana. They're very old buildings like this old church. Here's the Bacardi building. After the revolution, the Bacardis left and the rum factories were nationalized. But part of the Bacardi family had an interest in bats. I don't know if you guys know this. You can't tell, but at the very top of this Bacardi building, there's a bat statue up there. Some part of the family came here to Florida and they founded the Luby Bat Center just north of Gainesville here, where they have bats from all over the world and are really big on bat conservation. That's all from the Bacardis. Downtown, Old Town, Havana, you'll see, here's the Floridita Bar. This is where Hemingway would hang out, and their big thing was the daiquiri, which I don't know if Hemingway invented the daiquiri or the bar owner invented it. Here's another one, Sloppy Joe's here. You can go to Key West and see a similar looking Sloppy Joe's there. Down in Cienfuegos, as I mentioned, this is a French colonial city with spectacular, there are just some spectacular buildings there from that era, just beautiful. And some of these are open to the public or museums now. You can go visit those, and just very intricate architecture. Santiago de Cuba in the southeastern part of the country, on the south coast. Here you see the city. These are the Sierra de Muestra mountains starting in the background here. This is where they have the National Cemetery. It's a huge cemetery, very interesting to go and visit that, just to see there are Americans are buried here. It's also the resting place for Jose Marti, the great liberator who freed the slaves. He's an icon. You see busts and pictures and everything about Jose Marti all over the place. And not far from Jose Marti Memorial is also where Fidel is supposed to be buried, and they have a grave site there for Fidel, guarded by a soldier. There's a lot of rural places there, and these are kind of places you might see just anywhere in Latin America. Just a little farmhouse, This one's in the Vinales Valley where they grow a lot of tobacco. They have they take a lot of pride in their gardens around the house. So you see the vines and all kinds of other plants, even in this little shack here. Other ones like you see here that are a plank house, those are probably royal palms that have been sawed into boards. They also use palm leaves for thatch. They use the bottom part of the palm leaf. They flatten that out and use it as siding or as a building material. Here on the right, you see a wood stork flying over the famous Zapata Swamp at sunset. The Zapata Swamp, it looks like the Everglades. It has saltwater, mangroves, salt marshes, and vast freshwater marshes there. It's also the home for some endangered animals, birds. People will go there to see those creatures. The Cuban people are very educated, and as they go through elementary and high school, they're tested, and depending on your abilities, if you're good in math, you can end up at, in Havana, at the University of Havana, getting a degree in engineering or something related to math, some technical field. They have a lot of biologists there and research stations. Here's a Cayo Coco Marine Station, Soroa Orchid, but they have little places like this tucked away all across the country. And agricultural research going on and other things. So there's a lot of scientists there that are really highly educated. Their problem is they don't have any money. So just about everybody earns about $40 a month or so, even doctors, although doctors will have some other privileges and all, they're not earning a lot of money there. And so it's a difficult place to live just because there's no money for travel, for even buying food sometimes can be difficult at times. Let's look at some of the biology there. Florida, we have about 3,000, 4,000 species of plants. Cuba, even though it's about a third the size of Florida, it probably has 3 times the plant life we have. It has many, many species of palms, orchids, just all kinds of interesting plants and flowers. Down here in the lower left, this is the garland ginger. They call it the mariposa. This is their national flower. It's not a native one, but it's one that they really like. Here's an orchid up here, and various kinds of morning glories and other kinds of wildflowers. They have a really good herptile fauna, frogs, lizards, snakes, not so much on the snakes, lizards, tremendous numbers of lizards. And there's a Cuban boa constrictor, special to Cuba. This is a relative of it here in the constrictor group. Here's a Cuban tree frog. Cuban tree frogs have gotten loose in Florida, and we even have them on our house here in Gainesville now as an invasive exotic. Here's one of the smallest frogs in the world from the Humboldt National Forest in northeastern Cuba. You see it's fitting on a small coin here. Many kinds of lizards, some similar to what we have, and we have Cuban brown anoles here in Florida too. So some of these are familiar to people that live in Florida. The iguanas they have there are special rare things. You only see those in a few places. Oddly enough, they have 2 kinds of crocodiles. On the North Coast, they have the same crocodile that we have in South Florida, in the Florida Keys and Everglades National Park, the saltwater crocodile. But in the Zapata Swamp, in the southwestern part of the country. They have one only found in Zapata. And they take care of these because these are quite valuable animals. They have alligator or crocodile farms where they farm them because a purse made from alligator or crocodile skin could sell for $10,000.
There we go. Oops.
You all still with me? Are you asleep yet?
You blinked out there briefly, but please proceed.
Okay. The birds, of course, they have their resident birds like the Cuban parrot, Cuban parakeet, Cuban pygmy owl, Cuban toady, which is related to hummingbirds. But then they also have the migratory birds on their way to North America in the springtime and back to South America in the fall. So things like redstarts and palm warblers are there too. And many birders go there to see Cuban birds. You still with me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we can see you. We just have some people who are unmuted.
Oh, okay.
The host should be able to mute them.
Speaking of birds, the Cuban trogon here is the national bird. It has the national colors of Cuba. And it's not uncommon in the mountain areas. It has a very melodious call to it. Red-legged thrushes. One of these showed up in the Keys after Hurricane Ida passed through last year. And it went over Cuba and over the Keys. And they were seeing butterflies like the malachite from Cuba and a few of the birds from Cuba there. I mentioned that Cuba has the smallest bird in the world. The bee hummingbird here. It's bigger than a bee, okay? That's a little bit of a misnomer, but it is a size smaller than the ruby throat. It's very tiny, and it's only found in a few places in Cuba. All kinds of water birds like these flamingos and herons in the Zapata Swamp is a good place to see that kind of bird life. Mammals, they have tons of bats because in the limestone areas, these karst landscapes, it's all eaten up with caves and perfect for bats. And so they have a great variety of bats. Not much else as far as mammals, but they do have the only venomous mammal. Well, there's another one in Hispaniola, the Cuban solenodon. It has a venomous bite, very rare animal. I've seen some stuffed ones in museums there, never seen a live one. Their main mammal are these rodents, the hutias, and they have maybe a dozen different kinds scattered around the country. You see them mostly in the mountains there in forests. And let me show you one. Here's one he's keeping as a pet. He's dressed as an Indian, native Cuban, and this hutia, I mean, it doesn't get any cuter than that for a rodent. It was like a puppy dog. Tremendous numbers of invertebrates, you name it, they have it, from beetles, dragon damselflies. These crabs on the south coast, there can be millions of them at times. And this one is up in the corner of the ceiling. And right up the wall. I was on a bus one time and we just got out of the hotel and we're loading up into the bus. It was before sunrise. And just before the bus driver was ready to drive off, one of the tourists on the bus started screaming because there was a crab in the bus that had climbed in when the driver wasn't looking. These click beetles, bioluminescent click beetles, they call them the cucuyo beetle. We have a smaller version here in Florida. When this thing is flying around with these lights flashing, it makes two streaks, and it's just amazing to see those, the cucuyo. Lots of tropical snails there, many different kinds. Here's a ligulous tree snail like you would see in the Keys, but they have different color forms. Giant wasps, all kinds of beautiful tropical insects and snails. This one in particular, the Polymeta snail, comes in many different color forms, depending on what mountain range you're in. And they gather these and make tourist things out of them, like necklaces out of the various kinds of shells. They have leafcutter ants, interesting beetles of all kinds. Let's just look at some of the habitats that are there. Here's some coastal scrub. This is where you'd see the tala butterfly up in the north coast, Cayo Guillermo, with palms and other kinds of thorny, scrubby plants there. Down below here is the Zapata swamp with tree islands, just like you would see in Everglades National Park. Mangrove swamps, exactly like you'd see in Florida. But things you don't see in Florida are like these rocky coasts. This is from near Guantanamo. This cliff face covered with cactuses and beautiful Mediterranean blue water. On the north coast, sand beaches. And the thing about these coastal areas, there's practically nobody there because, you know, if you were there and had a boat, you might leave. So the government has really tightly regulated who has boats and who can use boats. And most of the people are so busy just with their daily lives, they're not going to come recreate here on a sand beach because they can't afford it. Look at this rocky coast down near the Bay of Pigs here, just spectacular coastlines. The Vinales Valley in Western Cuba, as I mentioned, is a karst area with these fantastic hills, steep-sided hills. They call these magotes. And you'll see all kinds of Europeans here climbing, rock climbing, rappelling, going in caves. They have disappearing rivers. It's an incredible landscape in Vinales. And much of that is a national park. Here's one of these serpentine savannas. It's a scrubland on these unusual soils with all the palms here are special, the grasses, just about everything in there is special. And here's just a coastal forest. You could see the same thing in Florida Keys as a dry tropical forest. And again, they have many, many acres. 90% of the country's like this, pastures or sugarcane or garden plots. They'll have orchards of various kinds of tropical trees, mangoes and other kinds of tropical fruits. It's different there. You know, I went there one time and I was going to set out some bait traps. And I thought, well, okay, we'll buy some bananas. We'll go to the market and buy bananas. And my colleague there said, oh, well, we don't have any bananas. And I'm like, how can you not have bananas? It's Cuba. He's like, well, it's not the season for bananas. So unlike in the United States or Europe or Canada, where you can buy any kind of fruit from any part of the world, you know, we have those fruits all the time now. We've kind of lost this idea of there's a season to fruit. But they still have that. So there's a season for mangoes, there's a season for bananas and other kinds of fruit that they would enjoy. Here's the Vinales Valley. This is a field that's just been planted with tobacco. They grow some of the finest tobacco. I'm not a cigar smoker, but I bought some cigars from a farmer here. He hand rolled them. He showed us how to hand roll this and make the cigars. I brought that back to some colleagues here, and they said those were the best cigars they've ever had. They have tremendous caves there in Vinales. All these mountains are just eaten up with caves and stuff. It's an incredible place to explore. Here's serpentine. So you see the green, it's green or red. It'll have a thorn scrub or sometimes there are pines. In some places you see this greenish rock. Again, it's very high in toxic metals, iron, nickel. On the northeast coast, Moa, the city of Moa, is the largest nickel mine in the world. They're basically mining out these areas for the nickel deposits through a Canadian company, I think. But that serpentine savanna near Camagüey has one of the rarest butterflies in the world, the Cuban yellow here. That's the only place that anybody seems to know about where it occurs. Mountains. These mountains are spectacular. Here's Gran Piedra down near Santiago de Cuba. You take a bus up this narrow winding road to the top, and this is the Sierra Maestra. And you can take on the other side of this, there's a ladder. You can go up on top and there'll be somebody selling trinkets up there. Spectacular views. You can see the Guantanamo Naval Base from there and the coastline. Just these other mountain ranges are little explored and just wonderful places to get into and look around in. Now, those high mountains in the east are very interesting because they create a climate zone. So on the north coast there in the northeast, you have Humboldt National Park, and it's their rainforest area. There are rivers, 15 or 20 rivers there from all the rain. It's the chocolate growing area of Cuba. So here's a cacao bush and some of the rushing rivers they have. If you go over the mountains to the south side, which is just a short, it's a few hundred miles, if that, and it's as dry as all get out. It's a thorn scrub with cactuses. It's like you're going to a different planet. Let's talk about the butterflies a little bit. So one of the interesting things, the West Indies and the Caribbean islands, this is one of the world's great hotspots for biodiversity because every island has its own forms, subspecies, species that occur nowhere else. So as an example, we can look at this butterfly. This is Bartram's scrub hair streak, if you've ever heard of that. You don't have this in Texas. It occurs in South Florida and in all these different places. So here's the form in Florida, which is now a federally listed endangered species. In fact, it's almost extinct. The only place you can see it is in Everglades National Park now. It's disappeared from the Keys. The form in Cuba is similar, but grayer underneath. And, the spots and stuff are a little bit different. But it's all over the place in the Bahamas, Lesser Antilles, Hispaniola, Jamaica. And you wonder, how did this little butterfly get around all those different places? But either somehow they did. They were blown around or somehow dispersed to these places and differentiated over time. Let's look at some of the butterflies. Here are some of the swallowtails you'd see in Cuba. To me, the most spectacular one is Gunlock swallowtail here, Ph.D. gunlockianus. It's a common butterfly in the east, and there's a population in the far west, but other than that, it doesn't occur anywhere else in Cuba. Polydamas is special. If there's an E showing after the name, that means it's endemic, meaning that subspecies or that species is only found in Cuba. Quite a nice selection of swallowtails. The whites, we have these in Florida, the Florida white, which is quite rare, almost extinct in Florida now. Great Southern white is very common here. Some of these different sulfur butterflies, you guys, I don't know if you probably have Statira, but you don't have pink spot or orb sulfurs. Only in recent times did we discover the pink spot is actually a resident butterfly in Florida. And it's named for this little pink spot right here at the base of the wing. The Statira does not have that. The orbed has it though. And it turns out that the pink spot is one of the most common butterflies in downtown Miami because the Cuban people planted the host plant. It's a tree called Lysoloma sabacu. And it's a street tree in Miami where the butterfly occurs. Some of these other butterflies are really spectacular. They have the two kinds of angled sulfurs. This orange washed sulfur, Phoebus avenulata, is just a spectacular thing, huge sulfur butterfly, the biggest of any of the sulfurs there. Apricot sulfur is very rare, and these other ones are quite common. They have a great diversity of these small yellow butterflies too, that are similar to the ones in Florida, but they have many more than what we have. And if you've been following these around, you know, they have to sit for you to be able to identify them. And often they don't sit. And it's a very frustrating thing when you see a dozen of these butterflies flying around and you're trying to identify them in the field. Hair streaks are locally common in places. And we have some of these. We have all three of these in Florida, although the disguised is just a rare stray from Cuba. But the other two are breeding species in South Florida, as is the gray mini streak here. Silver bandeds we have these. We don't have in Cuba, or in Florida, the Cuban hair streak. And this was thing, I was trying to figure this out. The books say it's a common butterfly there, and I had never seen it until just a few years ago, because we were going at the wrong time of year. Many of the trips I'd been on earlier were birding.
Lock the back door.
Many of the trips I had been on were trips to see birds, and they're going in the spring and fall to see the migrating birds, and the butterfly is only out in the summertime. And it turns out it is pretty common. We've seen it in many places now, but only in the summer. Of course, summer is quite hot and humid in Cuba. Many other blues. The Western pygmy blue is interesting because here in Florida, we have a different species of pygmy blue in our salt marshes. Again, this is a relic of Cuba coming from Mexico, Central America, where they have Western pygmy blues. Here's some other beautiful butterflies. This red and black leafwing is a spectacular thing. They have one of the sister butterflies, the emperor, silver emperors, feeds on species of hackberry. Skippers, the flashers, they have a number of these flashers, which are, many of them are rare, hard to find. But this one, the Havana flasher, is actually the most common of them. The greenback rubii, this is one, I don't think you guys have this in Texas, do you?
In the valley occasionally.
Okay, it's a common neotropical butterfly. It has the red eye, it's a forest butterfly, and you're not going to see it much in the daytime unless you flush them out of the grasses. It's more of a crepuscular species. Now, you may have read about this butterfly. This is an Asian butterfly that's gotten loose in the Caribbean. It first showed up in the Dominican Republic. And shortly after, it showed up just about everywhere. It showed up in Cuba. It showed up in the Cayman Islands, of all places, this tiny, tiny little islands between Cuba and Jamaica. And it showed up in Jamaica, maybe the Bahamas. And there were pest alerts issued by the Florida Department of Agriculture to watch out for this thing because they consider it a pest of citrus trees. And now in Cuba, it's been a different story there. It did come in early on in the eastern side of the country, but it's been a very slow spread to the rest of the country. And nobody quite knows how this thing has been gotten around or even how it even got there. It's been hypothesized that it got loose from a butterfly farm and display, which they do have some in the Virgin Islands. There's one there that possibly came from, but I'm not sure where it came from. And it's not really a pest of citrus. It's a beautiful butterfly. If you get to see this thing, spectacular. They also have, of course, tremendous moth diversity in Cuba. They have about the same number of butterflies as Florida. It's a little over 200 species have been recorded from there. And the moths are, you know, many more thousands of moth species. We get the black witch here also. Maybe you have this in Texas as well. Here's some hawk moths, the frangipani sphinx. And this other one, we only recently figured out what that was, and I forget the name for it now, but it's another frangipani specialist sphinx moth. Here's a pair of mating plume moths. Here's a scene from Gran Piedra at night, and you go out and you see this wall and you're like, okay, what am I going to photograph here? Just thousands and thousands of moths flying up into this cloud forest site. They do have botanical gardens scattered around the country, and they're tasked with preserving native plants that are special to that region, and also displaying plants from all over the world from tropical countries. So they'll have an African section, Australian section, that kind of stuff. They don't really understand butterfly gardening. That hasn't taken off there. They don't know, but they plant flowers that are good for butterflies many times. And so those are good places to look for butterflies. Here's some various kinds of nectar plants. This Spilanthes, this is a weed along roadsides. This is a medicinal plant. Again, the Cuban people have kept their folk medicine, and you can ask people just along the road, you know, oh, what is this plant? And they'll go, oh yeah, we use that for, you know, for colds and coughs and stuff. You make a potent out of it. So they know a lot about medicinal properties of their native plants there. So this is a variety of different things, the heliotropes, the Biden's alba that we have here, porter weeds. You're all familiar with the various life stages of butterflies. Here's the Polydamas swallowtail, being a toxic one to birds. Birds won't eat this because of the noxious chemicals in it. So they lay clusters of eggs and have groups of caterpillars that can defoliate your pipe vines. Some of the host plants, here's a hammock skipper female laying eggs on this Lonchocarpus in the pea family. Here's a Bauhinia. Now they have a native Bauhinia, but they have exotic Bauhinia trees from, or orchid trees from Asia planted there. And this gold spotted aguna feeds on the exotic species, but there's another one of the agunas that only feeds on the native Bauhinia there. The Cecropia trees that they have, there's several different kinds of butterflies like this small beauty that only feed on Cecropia. Here's just a mishmash of various native plants. They're pipe vines, the Aristolochias, they have many of them. And the flowers are completely weird on many of those. I love those flowers. Many different kinds of beautiful passifloras. The stigmaphyllon is a host plant for the Cuban hairstreak we saw, and also some of the skipper butterflies. Many different plants to explore there and figure out. You guys still awake?
You bet.
Okay. This Erythrina, this is one of the living fence post plants. So you cut a branch, stick it in the ground, and it grows a new plant. So you can use it as a living fence post. It's the host plant for that Havana flasher that I showed earlier. There are a number of different palm feeding butterflies, skippers there. But all of these are host plants for some kinds of butterflies. Now get this. So out of, I don't know what they have, 8,000 or 9,000 different kinds of plants there. Here's this croton bush, and it's the host plant for 3 different Cuban butterflies of 3 different families on this one plant. They have 9,000 kinds of plants to pick, and for some reason, these 3 are picking this one kind of bush. Why is that? Well, my colleague there, Douglas Fernandez, who lives in Camagüey, he's an incredible guy. He's got a college degree from there, but he's he loves butterflies. He has one of the best butterfly collections in Cuba, and he's been coming on our trips. And Douglas and I are working on a book on the Cuban butterflies. Douglas does fantastic photography with a crummy little camera that I brought him. He's able to rear many of these species that are very difficult to rear. And so we're working out the life histories and documenting that with photography. So our trips, we're exploring Cuba because there's still species that we have to discover there, tucked away in some corner. So we're trying to find the rarest butterflies there and trying to understand those for conservation purposes, and also looking for new species. So here's Douglas pointing out in this pine scrub. This is on serpentine soils up in the mountains. Here's Miriam taking a picture, and Barbara waiting to take a picture of the, did I mention that Cuba has some of the smallest butterflies in the world? Here's the Nanus skipperling that's pretty common in these pine grassy spots here. On one of our trips in, I think 2015, was it? In one of these places, we discovered a new species of butterfly that's just been named Callisto sharkii. And here's Douglas. He just collected the first specimen, the holotype. And everybody's very happy here that we found this new species of butterfly. It turned out that Miriam had to go back to the car for another battery. And she's walking back, not very far. And she says, "Oh, I think I have a tiny little skipper over here." And I'm like, "Miriam, we just found a new species of butterfly. You want me to come look at this damn skipper over there?" And she said, "Yes." And we go look at it, and it turns out to be one of the rarest butterflies in Cuba, the Brunner skipperling. And we've figured out now that both this Callisto, the Brunner skipperling, and maybe others are feeding on this vining bamboo that grows in these very special places there. So wherever we've seen this bamboo, we've been finding Brunner skipperling and maybe the Callisto as well. So knowing your host plants is very important. So here's a small Cecropia plant. Oh my God, what's that on the leaf there? What's that orange thing? Holy cow.
Oh, wow.
And Cecropian caterpillar. So you never know what you're going to find. But as we get exploring and understanding this more, we're able to find things like the Orion Cecropian caterpillar. Of course, we're collecting data. We're documenting a lot of it with photography. So here's Barbara, and we'll take maybe 6 or 8 people along on these exploring trips to document. And we're finding some of the rarest butterflies in the world. Here's the Holguin skipper. Scientific name is Holguinia holguin. There's probably only a dozen specimens in collections. This is the only one I've ever seen. Caribbean hairstreak. This is the first one I've seen in Cuba, very rare. Same with the Cuban flasher here in Auxinia swallowtail. So we are, as we explore, we are finding these incredibly rare and special butterflies unique to Cuba. So I've been working with this Tree Institute, the Tropical Research Education group, and they do tours to various places, including Cuba. And part of the money that's raised from these tours go back into the country. So I've been working with Douglas here on the butterflies. Here's Raul Verdesius, an expert on the palms there. He's collecting fruit to grow this endangered palm. We're working on things like monarchs. You know, if you look at the literature, monarchs are supposed to be really common in Cuba. It seems like they've almost disappeared. And so things are changing there. So we're trying to establish a baseline for for the butterflies there. As part of our work, we just this year are proposing a national butterfly for Cuba. It would be Gunlock's swallowtail, since it has the Cuban colors, just like the Cuban trogon does. And we're trying to get that into somebody in the legislature there and see if they'll make it the national butterfly. Oh, anybody awake yet?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I mentioned we're exploring Cuba. I'm hoping to go to Cuba later this year and see wonderful things like this. Have you ever seen a rainbow lizard like that? I mean,
Wow.
incredible. If anybody wants to go, you can contact me and I'll put you on the list and see if you want to go. And that's my talk. Anybody have questions?
Excellent.